In 2010, a federal judge sentenced the man to 25 years in prison for threatening to kill the creators of South Park over a single episode. In 2019, the Chinese government erased every trace of the show from its internet within 5 days of one episode airing. In 2006, a coalition of bishops, a sitting prime minister, and religious leaders from multiple faiths across 2 countries tried to stop one episode from reaching audiences in New Zealand. The episode aired. It drew 6 times the show's normal audience that night. 9 attempts across 28 years. Governments, religious institutions, extremist groups, and a network that censored its own finished product without informing the people who made it. Some bans lasted decades, some lasted days. 5 episodes remain permanently removed from every legal streaming platform in the world right now, to this day. Through all of it, the show never once stopped making the next episode. Welcome to East Park. Let's get started. The show that started as a Christmas card. South Park started as a piece of paper. In 1992, Trey Parker was a film student at the University of Colorado in Boulder. For a class project, he made a short animated film called The Spirit of Christmas: Jesus vs. Frosty, in which Santa Claus and a magical snowman fight each other while 4 small children watch from the side of the road. The animation was built from literal paper cutouts moved under a camera, frame by frame, photographed by hand. The whole thing looked like a craft project from an elementary school classroom. That was the joke, partly. The gap between how simple and childlike the animation looked and how violent and strange the content was. The short got passed around between friends, between colleagues, between people in the early years of what the entertainment industry was starting to call digital sharing. People who watched it liked it more than they expected to. 3 years later, in 1995, a Fox television executive named Brian Graydon paid Parker and his creative partner Matt Stone $1,000 to make a second version of the same short film. He wanted it as a video Christmas card to send to people in the industry. This second film, titled The Spirit of Christmas: Jesus vs. Santa, had Jesus in a fight again, this time against Santa Claus. But it introduced something new. 4 paper cutout boys standing at the edge of the action, watching the chaos from a safe distance, commentating on what they saw. Those 4 boys were the beginning of everything. Graydon sent the tape out. It spread. Comedy Central acquired it, liked what they saw, and offered Parker and Stone a deal to build a full television series from the same characters and the same visual world. South Park premiered on Comedy Central on August 13th, 1997. The first episode was titled Cartman Gets an Anal Probe. Before the show had played a single frame, the title alone communicated exactly what Parker and Stone planned to do with the opportunity they had been given. The 4 main characters were Eric Cartman, Kyle Broflovsky, Stan Marsh, and Kenny McCormick. They were 3rd graders, bumped to 4th grade by the 2nd season, living in a small mountain town in Colorado. Cartman was selfish and manipulative in ways that went far beyond what the traditional animated villain usually did. He was deliberately cruel. He was calculating. And the show never softened him or tried to make him redeemable through small acts of kindness. Over the first few seasons, as the show found its footing, Cartman evolved into something specific and genuinely unsettling. A character who held views that were ugly by any measure and acted on those views with an intelligence that made him more dangerous than he first appeared. The show used him as a kind of argument. The worst person in any room is usually the one who figures out exactly what that room is afraid of and then says it with complete confidence. By season 3 and season 4, Cartman had become the show's most recognizable character, and the one that critics, parent groups, and various organizations cited most often when they argued that South Park was doing something harmful. Kenny McCormick died in nearly every single early episode. Run over, crushed, electrocuted, torn apart, and came back alive in the next episode without comment from anyone in the show. The show offered no explanation and was clearly satisfied with the fact that it didn't need to. Kyle Broflovsky was the moral voice of the group, the one who argued for the right thing and usually ended up on the losing side of every argument. Stan Marsh was the most ordinary of the 4 boys, which in a town like South Park was its own very specific form of misery. Parker and Stone kept the paper cutout visual style from those original short films. As the production grew and budgets increased, the look stayed exactly the same. Flat, mechanical, cheap looking on purpose. Every character moved in short, stiff steps. Backgrounds had no depth or texture. Nothing was polished. The cheapness was intentional. The show understood that the gap between how crude the animation looked and how pointed the actual content was, that gap was doing essential work. The show looked like children had made it. The show then said things that most adults were were too careful or too cautious to say. Holding both of those things together in the same frame was something no other animated show on television was attempting in 1997. The early audience was immediate and loyal. Within the first season, episodes were drawing millions of viewers per episode, significant numbers for a late-night cable program. Comedy Central was a small network without a defining identity, and South Park became that identity almost overnight. The show had gone from a peculiar cable experiment to the network's most valuable property within a single year. By the early 2000s, South Park had grown into something larger than its original context. Catchphrases from the show entered everyday conversation in the way that only a handful of television programs ever manage. The characters appeared on merchandise sold in enormous quantities. The show was referenced by people who had never watched a full episode and argued over by critics who had never seen its best work. For a late-night animated series on a small cable channel, that kind of cultural weight was remarkable. It also meant the show had accumulated enemies who had formed firm opinions about what South Park was and what it represented without having directly engaged with it. People and institutions responding to a reputation rather than the actual content of specific episodes. The complaints had begun arriving almost as quickly as the audience did. In those first years, the objections centered mostly on language. The boys swore with a frequency and creativity that was unusual even for cable television in that era. Kenny's deaths were played for pure comedy, with no grief and no consequence. Real public figures were impersonated in ways that were at best unflattering. The show's treatment of religious content made certain communities furious. Parent organizations filed formal complaints with Comedy Central. Some advertisers chose not to be associated with the time slot. Television critics wrote pieces declaring the show a symptom of cultural collapse. The show changed nothing in response. What made South Park structurally different from every other animated comedy of its era was the speed at which Parker and Stone produced it. Standard animated series take anywhere from 6 months to a full year to complete a single episode. The process is long because traditional animation requires enormous labor at every stage: writing, voice recording, frame-by-frame drawing, editing, music, and delivery. Studios build their entire production calendars around that reality. Parker and Stone built a different system entirely. South Park operated on a roughly 6-day production cycle. An episode would be conceived, written, animated, recorded, edited, and delivered to Comedy Central in under a week. Some episodes were completed just hours before their scheduled airtime. This was not the result of chaos or corner cutting. It was a deliberate production model built around a very specific advantage: the ability to respond to the real world in real time. When a story was at the center of public conversation, South Park could have an episode about it while people were still talking. Every other animated show, locked into pipelines measured in months, could only arrive long after the moment had passed. South Park showed up in the middle of it, with something that felt live, felt immediate, felt like it had been made specifically in response to what was happening right now, because it had been. No other show on television operated that way. The production speed also created a practical obstacle for anyone hoping to censor the show before it aired. Most networks have review processes: legal review, content review, corporate approval layers that finished episodes must pass through before reaching audiences. South Park delivered finished work so close to airtime that a full review was often not practically possible. Parker and Stone understood this. The speed was protection, and they organized their entire workflow around it. The show's philosophy about targets was the thing that would eventually draw the widest range of enemies. South Park went after everyone: Christians, Muslims, Jews, Mormons, Scientologists, Buddhists, atheists, Democrats, Republicans, corporations, government agencies, charities, celebrities, social movements from every political direction. All received the same level of attention and the same willingness to find the most uncomfortable angle. No group was treated as off limits. Any group that appeared to expect special treatment was the group the show was most likely to pursue next. Parker and Stone said directly in interviews over the years that they believed equal treatment meant exactly that. No single group got a different standard from any other group. Any system where one community could demand protection from mockery while other communities remained available targets was, in their view, a system that rewarded whoever complained the loudest or threatened the most. South Park refused to function inside that system. That refusal was genuine and consistent across every season of the show. In season 5, which aired in 2001, the show produced an episode called Super Best Friends, in which the boys encounter a cult run by the magician David Blaine. To fight back, Stan enlists Jesus, who then assembles a team of religious figures from different world faiths, a kind of superhero group made up of spiritual leaders. That team included Buddha, Moses, Joseph Smith, Krishna, and Muhammad, who appeared on screen with the power to create create fire, depicted as a hero helping save the day. The episode aired with essentially no public reaction, no network notes, no complaints from religious organizations, no government response of any kind. Muhammad appeared as a good and powerful figure in a cartoon watched by millions of people, and life continued without disruption. That episode would become profoundly important 9 years later, when the same depiction, once entirely unremarkable, would be used to justify removing the show from public access permanently. By 1999, the show had already moved well beyond its origins as a cable experiment. The feature film, South Park, Bigger, Longer, and Uncut, released in June of that year with an R rating and went further than the television show had gone in almost every direction. On a production budget of $21 million, the film earned over $83 million worldwide. It received an Academy Award nomination for Best Original Song for a track called Blame Canada. Roger Ebert gave it 3.5 stars and called it a brilliant work of satire. The film's villain was a group of outraged American parents who, furious about a Canadian comedy their children had watched, formed a censorship organization and accidentally started a war. Parker and Stone were being as direct as they knew how to be about what they thought of the people who tried to shut things down. The show collected Emmy Awards for Outstanding Animated Program across multiple seasons. A Peabody Award came. Critical recognition kept arriving at the same time that organized attempts to silence the show kept arriving from entirely different directions. Both things were real, and both were growing. What Parker and Stone could not have fully predicted, even with all their thinking about speed, timing, and the dynamic between comedy and the people who try to stop it, was how many different kinds of institutions would eventually line up to take a run at them. The list would come to include a European National Broadcasting Authority, the government of Kuwait, a coalition of Catholic bishops backed by a sitting head of government, the Church of Scientology with its legal resources, a radical extremist group with connections to international terrorism, whose leader was sentenced to 25 years in federal prison specifically for threatening the show's creators, the People's Republic of China using the full weight of its internet censorship system, and the conservative political forces of the United States responding to an assassination. Each attempt came from a different direction. Each used different tools. Each one was aimed at a different episode or a different version of the threat they believed South Park represented. Some left permanent marks. Some failed completely and made the show more popular in the process. Before we move on, if you're enjoying this analysis, please consider subscribing. It helps the channel tremendously. The first attempt that actually succeeded in removing South Park from an entire country's television screens happened at the start of the new millennium. It had nothing to do with religion in the way most people would expect, nothing to do with Muhammad or Scientology or China. It came from Romania, and it was triggered by a single episode about a Jewish summer camp, an episode that Parker and Stone have since called one of their personal favorites, one that they believed was genuinely kind to the people it was depicting. The Romanian regulators saw it differently. Section 2. The country that banned the whole show. The National Audiovisual Council of Romania is the government body with authority over the country's broadcast media. Its responsibilities include monitoring television content, receiving complaints from the public, and enforcing a set of legal and ethical standards that determine what can and cannot air in the country. When it decides that a program has violated those standards seriously enough, it has the power to order the program removed from broadcast entirely. In the year 2000, members of Romania's Jewish community filed formal complaints with the council about an episode of South Park from the show's 3rd season. The episode was called Jubilee. The complaints described the episode as anti-Semitic. The council reviewed the episode and agreed with that description. They banned the show. Not just that episode, the entire program. South Park disappeared from Romanian television and remained absent for 8 years. The series returned in 2008 on MTV Romania. Comedy Central Romania did not pick the show up until 2016. The episode that triggered this response, one that Trey Parker and Matt Stone would later describe as among the best they had ever made, had removed their program from an entire European country's television landscape for nearly a decade. Season 3 of South Park aired in 1999. By that point, the show had completed 2 full seasons, reached millions of viewers per episode, and produced a feature-length film in theaters. South Park Bigger, Longer, and Uncut had released in June 1999. That film required an extraordinary amount of work. Parker and Stone had been producing the television show and the film at the same time, running a 6-day episode production cycle while simultaneously finishing a theatrical release. The workload was something no small team should have been able to manage. When Jubilee went into production, it aired roughly a month after the film released. Parker and Stone were exhausted, and for the first time in what felt like a long time, they had no immediate pressure to meet. That condition mattered. In the show's commentary, both creators described Jubilee as an episode where they stopped trying to be clever and just let the episode be strange and funny. Parker said they decided not to care how good the episode was and to simply make it dumb and weird. They came away believing it was one of the best things they had ever produced. The lesson they took from it was that they should stop overthinking their plots and instead follow the logic of whatever bit they had started until it reached its natural end. Parker has described the Moses character specifically as his personal favorite element of any episode from the show's early years. Jubilee follows Kyle Broflovsky and Kenny McCormick traveling to a Jewish summer camp of the same name. Kyle is Jewish, Kenny is not. Kyle wants Kenny to come anyway and persuades his parents, Gerald and Sheila Broflovsky, to allow it. The Broflovskys warn Kyle that Kenny might not be accepted at camp because he is not Jewish. They agree to let him try anyway. During the car ride to the camp, Gerald and Sheila explain the core ideas of Judaism to Kenny, in a conversation that is played for comedy but treated with a kind of earnestness that the show rarely applied to anything. The basic beliefs being described are accurate. The framing is absurd. Both things are true at the same time, which is a quality the show achieved more often in its earlier seasons than in its later ones. At the camp, the boys are divided into two groups. The older boys are called Jew Scouts, structured like the senior division of a traditional scouting program. The younger boys are called Squirts, in the same way that younger Boy Scouts are called Cub Scouts in the American scouting tradition. A leader among the younger group named Shlomo is working toward earning a merit badge called the Chutzpah badge, which requires him to catch a bear. The bear, which lives in the woods around the camp, keeps kidnapping members of the Squirts throughout the episode, which runs as a separate absurd thread alongside the main conflict. The camp holds a ceremony during the night of the meteor shower each year. The purpose of the ceremony is to honor Moses, whose spirit is said to manifest at the camp during this event. The campers make arts and crafts offerings. Moses arrives. His appearance is the most visually distinctive choice in the episode. Moses does not appear as a human figure. He appears as a giant floating face in the sky above the camp. Enormous, geometric, ancient-looking, and completely separated from the physical world of the human characters below him. Parker said in the show's commentary that the design was taken directly from the Master Control program in the 1982 film Tron, in which a computer program appears as a massive, glowing geometric face. The Moses of Jubilee uses exactly that visual, something sacred filtered through the look of old science fiction technology. What Parker was doing with the Tron reference was working through a creative image that made him laugh. What he produced by accident was a representation of Moses as a vast, disembodied spirit, which also happens to align with the tradition within Judaism of avoiding any physical depiction of holy figures. The theological resonance was probably not intentional. It is there regardless. Moses discovers that Kenny is not Jewish. He sends Kenny away from the camp. This is where the actual story begins. An elder named Garth steps forward and reveals himself as a representative of a group called the Synagogue of Anti-Semites. Garth argues that the camp should stop honoring Moses entirely and redirect its devotion toward Haman instead. Haman is a figure from the Hebrew Bible, specifically from the Book of Esther. In that story, Haman is a senior official in the ancient Persian Empire who convinces the king to issue an order for the killing of all Jewish people throughout the kingdom. He is the most recognizable anti-Semitic villain in all of Jewish religious history. The holiday of Purim exists as a celebration of his defeat. In Jewish religious practice during the Purim reading, Haman's name is drowned out with noise so it cannot be clearly heard. He represents the oldest and most universally understood version of the threat against Jewish survival. He is not a complicated or debated figure within the tradition. He tried to kill everyone. He failed. He is the villain. Parker and Stone chose this figure, the most clearly coded anti-Semitic villain available from within Jewish religious history, as the object of worship for their fictional anti-Semitic group inside a Jewish summer camp. The Synagogue of Anti-Semites is a group of Jewish people who have decided to devote themselves to the man whose entire purpose in life was the destruction of Jewish people. The joke is built entirely on the absurdity of that premise. The internal logic of the episode's villain is that he worships the thing that most defines itself as the enemy of everything the camp stands for. Garth traps Moses inside a conch shell. With Moses contained, the spirit's power is cut off and the camp is left without protection. Garth begins the process of summoning Haman. The other elders are held prisoner. The younger Squirts are in danger. Kenny, who had been sent away and was trying to find his way home through the surrounding woods, becomes aware that something has gone wrong at the camp. He turns back. He returns, knowing he is not supposed to be there, knowing Moses himself sent him away. In the episode's final sequence, Kenny breaks open open the conch shell and frees Moses. Moses kills Garth. The camp is saved. Kenny dies in the process. His death in this episode carrying slightly more weight than the pure comedy it usually represents, because here it is a choice made by someone who had no obligation to make it. The structure of that story, stated as plainly as possible, is this. The Jewish summer camp and its members are the heroes. The villain is a character who worships the most famous anti-Semitic figure in Jewish tradition and works to bring that figure back to power. The protector of the camp is Moses. The person who saves Moses is a non-Jewish outsider who was turned away and came back anyway. Anti-Semitism is the threat the episode exists to defeat. The CNA banned the show anyway. To understand why, it helps to understand the country in which the complaints were being made. Romania had been under communist rule from 1947 until the revolution of December 1989. Over 40 years during which independent institutions, including a free press and free expression, did not meaningfully exist. When communism fell, Romania began the process of building new democratic structures and, along with that, re-examining its own history. Part of what Romania was working through in those post-communist years was its record during World War II. During the war, Romania was governed by Ion Antonescu, whose regime aligned with Nazi Germany. Jewish communities in Romania and in the territories under Romanian administration were subjected to severe persecution. The Iași pogrom of June 1941, in which thousands of Jewish people were killed within the city itself, was among the most violent single events against Jewish communities on Romanian soil. The broader wartime record of the Antonescu government represents one of the most severe episodes of state participation in the persecution of Jewish people across all of occupied Europe during that period. By 2000, Romania's Jewish community was a very small fraction of what it had been before the war. The people who remained and the organizations that represented them were not separated from that history by generations of distance. For many in the community, the loss was personal. Parents, grandparents, entire extended families, the life that had existed before the war. When members of that community watched an episode of an American cartoon that treated Jewish summer camp traditions, Jewish religious practice, and the figure of Moses as material for comedy, and saw a fictional group within that episode called the Synagogue of Anti-Semites, their response was shaped by a relationship to anti-Semitism that had no equivalent in the experience of the people who made the show. The word anti-Semites, even inside a clearly satirical and fictional context, was not simply a word for a community that had lived through what Romania's Jewish community had lived through. The complaint filed with the CNA came from that lived experience. It was not an abstract concern about the potential influence of a cartoon. It came from people for whom the history behind that word was not distant. The CNA responded to those complaints. Whether the council's reading of the episode as anti-Semitic was accurate is a separate question from whether the ban was a reasonable regulatory response. And both of those are separate from the fact that the ban happened, lasted 8 years, and removed the show from an entire country's television access on the basis of a single community's pain. Parker and Stone built their show on a principle that equal treatment across all groups was the most honest position, that making something the subject of comedy was engagement rather than dismissal, and that no community deserved a different standard from any other. Romania demonstrated for the first time, but far from the last, that a principle developed inside one cultural experience does not automatically translate into every context in which it arrives. The gap between what the episode was doing and what certain viewers experienced it as doing was real, and the CNA chose to respond to the experience rather than the intention. The show survived it. South Park returned to Romania eventually, and the ban became one footnote among many in the show's long record of being removed from places it had never expected to be removed from. Before we move on, if you're enjoying this analysis, please consider subscribing. It helps the channel tremendously. Romania was the first country to take South Park off its airwaves after it had already begun airing there. The next country on the list never let it air at all, and to fill the space where South Park would have been, they built an entirely different show from scratch. Section 3. The country that never let it in. Kuwait is one of the smaller countries in the Arab world. It sits at the top of the Arabian Gulf, pressed between Iraq to the north and Saudi Arabia to the south and west, with open water stretching out to the east. The country covers roughly 6,800 square miles, small enough that a person could drive from one border to the other in an afternoon. Its population is predominantly Muslim. The Islamic faith shapes Kuwait's public life in a deep and practical way, organizing the country's legal system, its calendar of of public holidays, its social customs, and the standards by which government institutions evaluate what belongs in public life and what does not. Kuwait has a Ministry of Information. The ministry holds authority over what can be broadcast in the country. Foreign films and television programs must pass through a review process before they are allowed to reach Kuwaiti audiences. The ministry evaluates content against a set of standards that reflect the values of a Muslim society. If content mocks religious figures, contradicts Islamic values in an explicit way, or treats sacred subjects with contempt, the ministry has the power to refuse it entirely. The show does not air, the season is not broadcast. In the case of South Park, the entire program was stopped before it ever officially began. That is what happened. At some point in the late 1990s, as South Park was beginning to expand internationally beyond its American home on Comedy Central, the Kuwaiti government reviewed the show and reached a decision. The content was not suitable for Kuwaiti audiences. The reason recorded in the public record is that the show contained many jokes about Muslims. The ban covered everything, not a single episode, not one season, but the complete program in its entirety. South Park has never had an official broadcast presence in Kuwait. To understand what that decision meant in practical terms, it helps to understand how television and media worked in Kuwait during this period. Gulf countries in the late 1990s were navigating a significant tension between the growing availability of Western entertainment through satellite television and the desire of governments to maintain cultural and religious standards in public media. Satellite dishes were common. International programming was accessible. The challenge for governments like Kuwait's was not preventing all Western content from entering the country. That was already impossible. But determining which content would be allowed to exist in any official or publicly available form. Government licensed channels, official broadcast rights, and formally sanctioned streaming or broadcast distribution all required ministry approval. If that approval was refused, the content existed in a legal gray area at best, and the government could point to its official position without having formally endorsed anything. South Park fell on the wrong side of that line from the beginning. The ban was different in character from the one that came from Romania around the same time. Romania's response to Jubilee was reactive. A specific community filed a specific complaint about a specific episode, and the regulators responded to that complaint. Kuwait's ban was proactive and total. The government did not wait for one episode to offend one group. The show's overall approach to religious contents, and to Muslim content in particular, was its self-sufficient reason. Kuwait looked at South Park, understood the kind of program it was, and decided the answer was no. Within Islamic tradition, the dignity of the Prophet Muhammad and other prophets is treated as something requiring active protection. Mockery of a prophet is not viewed within that tradition as simply a matter of bad taste or poor judgment. In many Islamic legal frameworks, insulting a prophet is classified as a serious offense, not because feelings have been hurt, but because the honor of the prophet is understood as tied to the honor of the faith itself. Protecting that honor is not seen as optional. The concern extends beyond any individual Muslim's personal reaction. The argument is that mockery of sacred figures attacks something that the entire community of believers holds as fundamental. South Park's entire operating principle ran directly against that framework. The show treated no figure as above mockery. Jesus was a recurring character, a celebrity who hosted a public access television program and regularly failed to prevent bad things from happening around him. The show placed Jesus in physical fights, in absurd situations, and in conversations that treated his divine status as material for comedy. He was affectionate and earnest and consistently ineffective. He was played for laughs with warmth, but with no sense that his importance to Christianity demanded any special handling. The same approach applied across every religion the show addressed. Moses appeared in Jubilee as that enormous geometric figure in the sky, his ancient authority over the Jewish camp depicted with both genuine weight and comic strangeness. Buddha appeared in later episodes. Joseph Smith, the founder of the Mormon faith, received a detailed and largely accurate account of his life rendered in the show's most absurd comic style. The show approached each of these figures the same way. Learn what the tradition actually contains, find the most human dimension of it, and make that the subject. Applied to Islam, that same principle meant treating Muslim figures and Islamic tradition with the same energy the show applied to everyone else. From the perspective of Parker and Stone, this was fairness. The same approach they applied to Christianity was applied to Islam, the same one they applied to Judaism. From the perspective of the Kuwaiti Ministry of Information, this was not fairness. This was a particular kind of assault on something the government had a legal and cultural responsibility to protect, dressed up as a consistent philosophy. In November 2001, well after Kuwait's ban was already in place, South Park aired an episode called Osama bin Laden Has Farty Pants. The episode aired on November 7th, 2001, less than 2 months after the September 11th attacks on the United States. States. In the episode, the four boys travel to Afghanistan as part of a pen pal exchange that goes wrong. Cartman spends the episode in a series of cartoon battles with Bin Laden, drawn from the physical comedy style of classic American cartoons, in which Bin Laden is made small, cowardly, and repeatedly humiliated. The episode ends with Cartman killing him. The show released this content during the period of deepest national grief and anger in American public life in generations, while military operations in Afghanistan had only just begun. For any observer already concerned about how South Park handled Muslim content, this episode would have confirmed every concern. Bin Laden was a Muslim figure. The episode transformed him into a figure of pure contempt and comedy. The fact that Bin Laden had committed an act of mass murder, something that Kuwait, a long-standing American ally, also condemned, did not change what the show had done with the material. A Muslim figure was made grotesque. The show treated this as no different from what it had always done with every other figure from every other background. Kuwait had already decided, before this episode was made, that it was not going to permit that on its airwaves. The government's response to the ban did not stop at simply removing the show from Kuwaiti television. In 2000, a local animated program called Block 13 was created specifically to fill the space where South Park would have been. Block 13 was a more family-friendly production, a Kuwaiti animated series built for local audiences, designed around the kind of content the ministry would have no objection to. The show ran for 3 seasons before being canceled. Block 13 deserves a moment of attention because it reflects something specific about how Kuwait understood the problem. The government's argument, made through the creation of the replacement show, was not that animation was unsuitable for Kuwaiti audiences, or that comedy was unsuitable, or that adult-oriented entertainment was unsuitable in principle. The argument was that the specific values South Park brought to its content were unsuitable. Create something in the same format that operates according to different values, and you have addressed the problem without simply leaving an empty slot in the broadcast schedule. Block 13 ran 3 seasons and ended. That it did not continue indefinitely suggests that what Kuwaiti audiences were being offered as a substitute did not generate the kind of loyalty that South Park generated in the markets where it was allowed to run. South Park's audience in other countries did not watch the program because it occupied a time slot or because animation appeals to a particular demographic. They watched because of exactly what South Park was doing: the speed of response to real events, the willingness to go directly at subjects other programs avoided, the consistent refusal to treat any topic as permanently off limits. Block 13, built specifically to avoid doing those things, could not replicate what made the original compelling. It ran its course and was canceled without leaving much of a trace. The ban was never lifted. South Park has never officially broadcast in Kuwait. Unlike Romania, which eventually allowed the show to return after 8 years, Kuwait maintained its position across the show's entire run, through more than 27 seasons, through more than 300 episodes, through every controversy and every international incident that followed. The decision made at the beginning held at every point after. What Kuwait represents in the full story of South Park's relationship with censorship is a particular kind of opposition. Romania reacted to a specific wound. Kuwait acted in advance. The Kuwaiti government looked at South Park, understood its operating principles before those principles had a chance to do anything on Kuwaiti soil, and decided that understanding was reason enough to keep the show out. The ban was not emotional. It was not the response of a community in pain. It was a calm, regulatory decision made by people who knew exactly what South Park was and what it would eventually do, and who chose not to allow it into the space they were responsible for protecting. Parker and Stone built their show on the conviction that treating all groups equally was not just a comedy approach, but a matter of basic intellectual honesty. Kuwait's response demonstrated that the same principle, applied consistently and without adjustment, still produces very different results depending on where it lands. Equal mockery in a country where mockery of sacred figures carries no legal weight is a different act from equal mockery in a country where that mockery has specific legal and cultural consequences. The show never distinguished between those two contexts. Kuwait never had to explain its position more than once. South Park kept making episodes. Kuwait kept the ban in place. Neither side has ever changed its position. Before we move on, if you're enjoying this analysis, please consider subscribing. It helps the channel tremendously. The next serious challenge to the show came from a very different direction. Not from a government with formal legal authority over what could broadcast, but from an organization operating entirely inside the United States, one that had been present in the show's world almost from the beginning. This organization had no power to ban anything. What it had instead were celebrity connections, legal resources, and quiet institutional pressure. And it came very close to permanently removing one of the show's show's most beloved characters from the program entirely. Section 4. The Church, the Closet, and the Chef. Scientology is a religious organization founded in 1954 by an American author named L. Ron Hubbard. Hubbard had been a highly productive writer of science fiction novels and stories before developing the ideas that became the foundation of the Church. The organization grew steadily across the second half of the 20th century and built a particularly strong presence in Hollywood, where a number of prominent actors and entertainers joined its membership. The Church of Scientology has a well-documented history of responding forcefully to public criticism, through lawsuits, through organized campaigns against journalists and publications that ran unflattering material, and through sustained institutional pressure applied to anyone or anything it considered a threat to its reputation. Parker and Stone had been aware of Scientology for years before they made an episode about it. Parker said publicly that the primary reason they had not already done a full episode on the Church was Isaac Hayes. Hayes had been voicing the show's character Chef from the very first episode, a warm, good-humored cafeteria worker in South Park Elementary who served as something of a mentor and adult friend to the four main boys. Hayes was a Grammy Award-winning musician. His work through the 1970s placed him among the most important figures in soul and rhythm and blues during that era. He was also a practicing Scientologist. Parker and Stone had genuine affection and respect for Hayes, and out of that respect, they had held back from going after an organization they knew he had a sincere connection to. Parker credited the magician Penn Jillette, a longtime friend, with helping push them past that hesitation. Jillette had been openly critical of Scientology for years and had encouraged Parker and Stone to stop treating the Church differently from how they treated everyone else. Season 9 of South Park aired in 2005. The 12th episode of that season, Trapped in the Closet, broadcast on Comedy Central on November 16, 2005. Parker wrote and directed it. The writing credit for the episode was given to a man named John Smith, an obviously fake name that was itself part of the episode's joke about how Parker and Stone expected the Church to respond legally, and had already begun answering that response within the episode itself before a single complaint had been filed. The story goes like this. Stan takes a free personality test offered by Scientology recruiters on the street outside his house. The results come back, and the recruiters tell Stan he is profoundly depressed and that Scientology is equipped to help him. Stan joins the Church. As his assessments continue, his scores are so extraordinary that the Church's leadership concludes he is the reincarnation of L. Ron Hubbard, the organization's founder. Church officials bring him before a gathering and want him to produce new written materials for the organization. Tom Cruise is present at the event. Cruise approaches Stan and asks for his genuine opinion of Cruise's work as an actor. Stan, being the most straightforwardly honest of the four main boys, tells Cruise plainly that Cruise is a decent actor, but probably not the best Stan has ever seen. Cruise is devastated by this. He retreats to Stan's bedroom, steps inside the closet, and refuses to come out. From that point, the episode follows various characters trying to convince Cruise to leave the closet. John Travolta arrives to help and ends up stepping into the closet alongside Cruise. R. Kelly arrives, sings a song about the situation in the style of his multi-part song series, and is eventually also in the closet. The physical act of entering and refusing to leave the closet is a reference to the phrase coming out of the closet, used to describe a person publicly revealing they are gay. The episode never says this out loud. The phrase is never mentioned. The show simply keeps putting celebrities into the closet and having them refuse to come out, and lets the reference work without explanation. The joke operates at several levels simultaneously, and the episode does not hold the audience's hand through any of them. At the center of the episode, Stan is given a full account of what Scientology teaches its members at the higher levels of membership. What appears on screen during this sequence is a message in large letters. This is what Scientologists actually believe. Parker and Stone put those words there and meant them. What follows is an account of the Xenu story, the belief, documented in official Scientology materials, that a galactic ruler named Xenu transported billions of beings to Earth billions of years ago, destroyed them with hydrogen bombs, and that the spiritual remains of those beings now attach to living humans and cause psychological suffering. This is part of what members encounter when they advance to a level of the Church's training program called OT3. Parker and Stone presented this material accurately, using the organization's own documented descriptions, and placed the disclaimer on screen specifically so the Church could not claim the show had invented or distorted what its texts actually contained. The episode ends with Stan standing before a crowd that includes Church officials and the fictional versions of Tom Cruise and other celebrities. Stan tells them all to go ahead and sue him. He says it clearly and without backing down. The scene closes. Parker and Stone had anticipated legal pressure from the Church and built their response to that pressure into the final moment moments of the episode itself. The day after Trapped in the Closet aired, a senior Scientology official named Mike Rinder, who has since left the church and spoken publicly and at length about his years inside it, wrote an internal memo to the church's leader, David Miscavige. The memo dealt with the South Park episode and the question of how the organization should respond. Among the options discussed was initiating legal action against Parker, Stone, and Comedy Central. The church ultimately decided against pursuing a lawsuit. The legal case appeared too weak to succeed. The show had been careful, the disclaimer offered real protection, and going to court would have drawn far greater public attention to the episode than allowing it to pass quietly ever would have. The church redirected its efforts toward a journalist named Andrew Ebner, who had consulted on the episode. Ebner had previously written a book that included significant analysis of Scientology's presence and influence in Hollywood. The church attempted to investigate Ebner and build some basis to pressure or undermine his credibility. This effort produced nothing of practical consequence. Ebner continued his work without interference. 2 months after the episode first aired, Parker said that Isaac Hayes had come to see him. The conversation that followed made it clear to Parker that someone had sent Hayes specifically to ask whether the episode could be pulled from any future broadcast. Parker said the feeling of the conversation was obvious, that Hayes was not acting on his own, that someone had sent him with a specific goal, and that the request to remove the episode was coming from a source Parker did not believe was Hayes himself. The episode had already broadcast. Parker and Stone declined to do anything about it. On March 13, 2006, a press statement was released carrying Isaac Hayes' name. The statement announced that Hayes was leaving South Park and that the show's treatment of religion had crossed a line he could not accept. 2 days later, on March 15th, a rebroadcast of Trapped in the Closet that had been scheduled on Comedy Central's lineup was replaced without announcement. The episode that aired instead was Chef's Chocolate Salty Balls from Season 2. Comedy Central described the change publicly as a tribute to Hayes in the wake of his departure announcement. Reports published at the time by entertainment journalists suggested a different explanation, that Tom Cruise, whose film Mission Impossible 3 was approaching its release through Paramount Pictures, had communicated that he would not participate in promoting the film if the Trapped in the Closet episode was allowed to rebroadcast. Both Paramount and Comedy Central operated at that time under the same parent company, Viacom. The suggestion was that this connection created leverage Cruise could apply. No party involved ever officially confirmed this account. Matt Stone's public response to Hayes leaving was direct. Stone said the situation was entirely about Scientology. He pointed out that Hayes had been part of the show for 10 years, and through more than 150 episodes, during which South Park had gone after Christians, Muslims, Mormons, Jewish people, and every other religious tradition it had addressed. During all of that time, Hayes had raised no objection and had continued to collect his payment. The complaint arrived only when the show turned its attention to the church that Hayes belonged to. Stone said that Hayes appeared to want the show to apply a different standard to his religion than to every other religion, and that position was precisely the kind of thinking the show had always pushed back against. What Stone did not know at the time, and what Parker did not know, and what the public did not know, was that Isaac Hayes had suffered a stroke in January 2006. He had lost the ability to speak. He was relearning basic functions: how to talk, how to play the piano, how to function through days that now required enormous effort to move through. He was, at the moment when the press statement bearing his name was drafted and sent out, in no condition to make any professional decision at all. He could not end his own contract. He could not write a resignation. He could not authorize anyone else to do either of those things in his name. Isaac Hayes III, Hayes' son, has addressed this publicly on multiple occasions across multiple years. In 2016, in an interview with The Hollywood Reporter, Hayes III said that his father did not quit South Park. He said that at the time of the statement, his father was recovering from a stroke and was in the process of learning to speak again. The people immediately surrounding Hayes during his recovery, his assistants, the people managing his daily life and professional affairs, were members of the Church of Scientology. Someone within that group drafted the statement, released it under Hayes' name, and ended his working relationship with South Park. Hayes III said he does not know who specifically made the decision or put the words together. He only knows that his father was physically incapable of having made that choice himself. In a post on X published in July 2025, Hayes III said again what he had been saying for years. His father loved the show. He loved voicing Chef. He took genuine enjoyment from the work and from the connection it gave him to fans who recognized his voice. He had close personal warmth for Parker and Stone. The people responsible for his care during a medical crisis made a decision on his behalf that his father, had he been capable of making it himself, would not have made. Hayes died on August 10, 2008. He never returned to South Park after the events of 2006. He never had the chance to resolve publicly what had happened or to speak for himself about any of it. His son has been speaking for him instead, across years, trying to make sure the record reflects something closer to what actually occurred. Chef was written out of the show in the first episode of season 10 in 2006. Parker and Stone used audio recordings of Hayes' voice from previous episodes to construct dialogue for Chef in one final appearance. The character is then killed, struck by multiple causes in rapid succession, the scene playing as an obvious farewell from a creative team that was not particularly interested in letting the situation pass quietly. Parker and Stone were angry. The way the character left the show was their expression of that anger. In July 2006, Trapped in the Closet was nominated for a Primetime Emmy Award for Outstanding Animated Program. The episode, an organized religious institution had tried to suppress through legal considerations, internal memos, personal requests, and, according to widespread reporting, corporate leverage connected to a major Hollywood actor, received the television industry's highest formal recognition. The episode did not win the award that year. The nomination itself was its own kind of answer. The full sweep of what the Church of Scientology attempted, measured against what it achieved, tells a specific story. An organization with documented legal resources, access to celebrity networks, and a direct personal connection to one of the show's main cast members tried to shut down a South Park episode through every available avenue simultaneously. The episode broadcast. The rebroadcast was delayed but never permanently blocked. The episode returned to the schedule. The only lasting outcome was the departure of Isaac Hayes, which turned out to be something Hayes never chose, and which his own son has spent years working to correct in the public record. Before we move on, if you're enjoying this analysis, please consider subscribing. It helps the channel tremendously. The next attempt to silence South Park came from a very different kind of organization. Not a religious institution with legal resources, but a coalition of religious communities across multiple countries who found a single episode so offensive that bishops issued pastoral letters, prime ministers made public statements, advertisers were threatened with boycotts, and someone filed a court injunction in a country that had nothing to do with the show's production. The episode drew 6 times its normal audience on the night the bishops tried hardest to keep it off the air. Section 5. The bishops, the boycott, and the record audience. December 7th, 2005 was the eve of the Feast of the Immaculate Conception, one of the most significant days in the Catholic calendar, observed by more than 1 billion practicing Catholics around the world. The feast marks the belief that the Virgin Mary was conceived without original sin, a doctrine that sits at the center of Catholic teaching about Mary's unique role in religious history and about the nature of divine grace. For practicing Catholics, this day carries a weight that does not translate easily to people outside that tradition. On the evening before that day, Comedy Central broadcast the 14th episode of South Park's 9th season. The episode was called Bloody Mary. The story runs on 2 tracks at once. In the first, Randy Marsh, Stan's father, drives drunk after a school sporting event and is pulled over and arrested. He loses his driver's license and is ordered to attend Alcoholics Anonymous meetings. At those meetings, Randy absorbs the recovery program's language in the most extreme way possible. He becomes convinced that his drinking is a disease, that he is completely powerless over it, that the alcohol controls him rather than the other way around, and that the only path forward is surrender to a higher power. Randy stops trying. He acquires a wheelchair. He frames himself as someone to whom alcoholism is happening, not someone who is doing something. The show had used Randy across many episodes to explore how adults arrange explanations for their behavior that conveniently remove their own responsibility from the picture. The alcoholism plot is the show's sharpest version of that argument. Randy collapses into helplessness not because the situation requires it, but because helplessness turns out to be the most comfortable option available to him. Stan's response when the miracle he has been brought to see fails to materialize is to point out to his father that if Randy stopped drinking the moment he believed the Pope had declared him cured, then Randy already possessed the ability to stop. And that ability had always been there, regardless of what any external authority announced. In the second track, a statue of the Virgin Mary in a nearby town begins to bleed. The bleeding draws crowds. Word spreads. People travel from across the region to witness what many of them immediately describe as a miracle. Pope Benedict XVI, who had assumed the role of Pope in April 2005, just months before this episode aired, is brought in to investigate. Benedict examines the statue closely and determines that the blood is coming not from the back of the statue, but from the front, from a specific part of the body. He concludes on this basis that the event cannot be classified as miraculous. The episode's joke is built on a physiological reality specific to women and frames the bleeding as something that happens regularly and therefore cannot carry supernatural significance. Randy, who had traveled to the statue hoping a miracle would solve his problem for him, is told by Stan to take personal responsibility for his own drinking. The episode ends with Randy accepting that. For practicing Catholics, the Virgin Mary occupies a specific and central place in devotion that makes any episode of this kind land differently from a piece of satire aimed at, say, a politician or a corporation. Mary is the mother of Jesus, which in Catholic teaching places her in a position unlike any other human being in history. The theology built around her role covers centuries of carefully developed doctrine. Statues of Mary are present in Catholic churches, schools, homes, and public spaces across every country with a Catholic community of meaningful size. For many believers, these objects function as active focal points, places where prayer is directed, where a felt connection to Mary as an intercessor and a figure of comfort is maintained. The Feast of the Immaculate Conception specifically honors the belief that Mary was kept entirely free from original sin from the moment of her own conception. Broadcasting an episode in which a statue of Mary bleeds from a specific physical location on the evening before the feast celebrating her purity landed for a significant portion of Catholic viewers not as crude comedy, but as a targeted attack on something they held at the center of their spiritual life. Parker and Stone discussed the episode's origins in their DVD commentary. The idea of a bleeding statue came from Anne Garofino, one of the show's producers who is Catholic. The conversation in the room had started with the real phenomenon of weeping statues, religious figures that appear to produce liquid under conditions that immediate observers cannot explain. These events have been reported across many decades in many countries and have produced both scientific investigations and genuine religious responses. Garofino suggested that the episode needed to push the bleeding further from what had already been seen in other contexts, further from the eyes, further from anything that might read as merely strange. The resulting episode was what actually aired. The episode played on December 7th. Comedy Central scheduled a broadcast of all 9th season episodes for December 28th. When that rerun happened, Bloody Mary was absent. Between those two dates, Bishop William Skylestad, who served as president of the United States Conference of Catholic Bishops, sent a formal written letter to Tom Freston, then the chief executive of Viacom, the company that owned Comedy Central. The letter described the network as having shown extreme insensitivity in airing the episode. Freston received it. The episode did not appear in the December rerun. Comedy Central sent responses to viewers and journalists asking about the episode's absence, stating that Bloody Mary had not been permanently retired and would remain part of the season 9 DVD release. The show's own website removed press materials and screen images from the episode without any public explanation. The episode occupied a strange space, not formally banned, not formally canceled, but quietly absent from every place where it had previously been visible. On March 14th, 2006, a correspondent named Rob Corddry addressed this directly on Comedy Central's own program, The Daily Show. Corddry reported on air that South Park's Bloody Mary episode had been pulled from broadcast after a single airing. He framed it as evidence of how organized complaint campaigns, directed at commercial broadcasters with enough consistency and volume, could produce results that formal censorship authority never could. Comedy Central was, in effect, allowing one of its own programs to acknowledge and critique a decision the network had made under external pressure. That was the American response. What happened in New Zealand was of a different order entirely. By February 2006, C4, a music and entertainment channel owned by a company called CanWest TV Works, was preparing to air the episode in New Zealand. The New Zealand Catholic Bishops' Conference moved quickly. The leaders of the conference reached out to CanWest directly and formally requested that the company cancel the broadcast. They were joined in this request by the Council of Christians and Muslims in New Zealand, by leaders of the Anglican Church, by leaders of the Presbyterian Church, and by the Federation of Islamic Associations of New Zealand, which described the episode as deeply offensive. The coalition calling on CanWest to pull the episode was broader than anything a single faith community could have assembled independently. New Zealand's Prime Minister was Helen Clark. Clark described herself publicly as an agnostic. She issued a statement saying the episode sounded revolting to her. In the same statement, she said that the decision belonged to the network and that CanWest had the right to air it. Clark's position gave the episode's opponents a public acknowledgement of their distress and a clear refusal to act on it from the country's most senior political figure, delivered in the same breath. CanWest refused to cancel the broadcast. New Zealand's Catholic bishops issued a pastoral letter. Pastoral letters are formal documents written by bishops and read aloud at every church service across all parishes in a diocese, or in this case, across all parishes in the country during Sunday Mass, reaching every practicing Catholic who attends that week. The letter called the episode episode ugly and tasteless. It said that making the depth of Catholic offense known publicly might give Can West reason to reconsider. It also called for a full boycott of C4 and of C4's sister channel TV3, both of which were Can West properties. Every practicing Catholic in New Zealand who attended Mass that Sunday was asked, from the pulpit, to stop watching 2 television channels. One advertiser responded and withdrew their spending from Can West networks. A Catholic organization called Family Life International built a dedicated website for coordinating the broader advertiser boycott, providing a structure through which people could identify and contact the companies paying to reach Can West's audience, asking those companies to pull their money. A company called C4 Productions, which had no connection of any kind to the television channel but happened to share its name, applied for an emergency court order on the night before the scheduled broadcast. The company's argument was that people would assume a connection between the controversy and their business, damaging their reputation through association. A judge heard the application and refused it. No court order was issued. The episode aired on February 22, 2006. During the broadcast, approximately 400 Catholics gathered outside C4's studio building. They held rosary beads, they sang hymns to Mary. A priest leading the gathering prayed aloud for the network's decision makers, asking that they be given the clarity to understand the harm they were doing. The protest remained peaceful throughout. 210,000 people watched Bloody Mary in New Zealand that night. South Park's normal C4 audience at that point was roughly 32,500 viewers per episode. The episode that a broad religious coalition, a prime minister, multiple denominations, an advertiser boycott campaign, and a court application had all tried to prevent from reaching audiences drew 6 times the viewers the show usually attracted on that channel. Rick Friesen, the chief operating officer of Can West TV Works, acknowledged publicly that he had expected some increase from the controversy surrounding the broadcast, but had not anticipated anything close to the actual number. C4 decided after the broadcast that it would not re-air the episode. New Zealand's Broadcasting Standards Authority received dozens of formal complaints in the weeks following. In June 2006, the authority issued its ruling. Every complaint was rejected. The authority found that the episode did not meet the threshold for a breach of broadcasting standards. Its ruling stated that showing disrespect toward a religious subject does not on its own constitute the kind of severe or targeted attack that the standards are designed to address. The authority also described the episode as being of such a clearly exaggerated and absurd nature that it could not reasonably be interpreted as a genuine attack on Catholic belief or Catholic practice. The Catholic bishops appealed this ruling to the High Court in Wellington. In those proceedings, the bishops described the episode as tasteless, crass, and ugly. The appeal moved through the legal process. The episode had already aired. The audience that watched it, swelled by the size of the campaign against it, had already watched it. In Australia, Archbishop Dennis Hart of Melbourne wrote to the SBS television network requesting that they not air the episode. SBS's programming director initially rejected the Archbishop's request. The director later reversed that position, citing as the reason the intense global controversy surrounding a Danish newspaper's publication of cartoons depicting Muhammad, which had produced violent protests across multiple countries in those same weeks. SBS chose not to air Bloody Mary and placed a different South Park episode in its broadcast slot instead. Measured across all 3 countries, the campaign against Bloody Mary used the widest range of tools any organized opposition to South Park had deployed up to that point. A formal letter to a corporate executive, a pastoral letter read at masses across an entire country, a statement from a sitting prime minister, a cross-faith coalition of multiple religious organizations, a financial boycott with a dedicated website, a legal application for a court order, a physical protest outside a television station, formal complaints to an independent broadcasting authority, a high court appeal of that authority's ruling, and a separate episcopal letter to a broadcaster in another country. Every tool was real. Every effort was genuine. The episode aired, drew its largest New Zealand audience, was rejected by the independent regulatory body, and returned to Comedy Central's American schedule in August 2006 without alterations. Before we move on, if you're enjoying this analysis, please consider subscribing. It helps the channel tremendously. While all of this was building in New Zealand and Australia, a completely different kind of problem had already arrived in the United States, one that had nothing to do with Mary, or with Catholic theology, or with any organized religious campaign. An episode that had first aired 5 years earlier in 2001, with no public reaction of any kind, was now being quietly removed from every platform where audiences expected to find it. Not because the episode had changed, but because the world around it had shifted in a way that made a 5-year-old image of a single character suddenly carry the weight of a global crisis. Section 6. The image nobody was allowed to see. On September 30th, 2005, a Danish newspaper called Jyllands-Posten published a collection of editorial cartoons. The cartoons depicted the Prophet Muhammad in various ways. Some were mild, some were direct. One showed Muhammad with a bomb built into his turban. The newspaper had commissioned the cartoons as a deliberate act. It wanted to explore the question of whether the fear of violent responses to criticism of Islam had begun to quietly limit what journalists, artists, and media organizations in Western countries were willing to publish. Publishing the cartoons, the paper was testing its own answer to that question. The response took several months to build, and then arrived all at once. By early 2006, the cartoons had spread from Denmark to other European newspapers. Muslim communities across many countries responded with protests. Those protests grew. In February 2006, the protests in some places turned violent. Embassies were set on fire in multiple cities. The Danish embassy in Beirut was destroyed. Embassies in Damascus and Tehran were attacked. Protests in Libya resulted in deaths. Over the following weeks, the death toll from violence connected to the cartoon controversy reached into the dozens across multiple countries. The range and the intensity of the response was unlike anything a newspaper editorial decision had produced in living memory, and it raised a question that every media organization in the world was now being asked to answer for itself. When publication of an image of Muhammad could produce this level of reaction, what was the right thing to do? Comedy Central had an answer. Its answer was to remove Muhammad from South Park. The problem was that Muhammad was already in South Park. He had been there since 2001. That was the year Super Best Friends aired, the season 5 episode in which Stan and the boys encounter a cult run by the magician David Blaine. Stan contacts Jesus for help, and Jesus assembles a team of religious superheroes from different world faiths to fight back. Muhammad was a member of that team. He appeared on screen in his full animated form, given dialogue, given the power to create fire, working alongside Jesus and Buddha and Moses and Joseph Smith and Krishna to stop the cult and save the people who had been drawn into it. He was a hero. His depiction was respectful by any reasonable measure. When the episode first aired in July 2001, not a single notable complaint was filed. The show received no public backlash of any kind over Muhammad's presence in that episode. The episode ran in normal syndication, was available on the show's website, and passed through the years following without anyone calling attention to it. After the Danish cartoon protests of February 2006, all of that changed. Comedy Central made the decision to pull Super Best Friends from broadcast reruns. The episode was removed from the show's rotation on the network. It disappeared from the South Park Studios website, where most episodes were available to watch for free at the time. The reason was the image of Muhammad that the episode contained, the same image that had existed without controversy for 5 years. The image had not changed. The episode had not changed. The context in which that image existed had changed, and Comedy Central's judgment was that the risk of continuing to broadcast it was now different from what it had been when the episode first aired. No formal announcement was made. The episode was simply no longer there. Parker and Stone learned from this that the network was operating under a set of constraints that had not previously been made explicit to them. Comedy Central would allow the show to go after virtually any subject in any form, except this one. The boundary was not about decency in any general sense. The same network was broadcasting other South Park content without concern. The boundary was specifically about Muhammad, not about Islam in general, not about Muslim characters in general, just about the image of the Prophet. Parker and Stone's response was to make an episode directly about that fact. Cartoon Wars was a 2-part episode that aired on April 5th and April 12th, 2006, less than 2 months after the peak of the Danish cartoon protests. The story follows the town of South Park reacting in panic to the announcement that the animated comedy Family Guy is planning to broadcast an episode in which Muhammad appears on screen, uncensored as part of its plot. The town panics because its residents believe this will trigger a violent response from Muslim communities worldwide, similar to what had happened with the Danish cartoons. Cartman travels to Los Angeles to try to get Fox Network to cancel the Family Guy episode before it airs, for reasons that turn out to have nothing to do with genuine concern. Cartman simply hates Family Guy and sees the crisis as an opportunity to get rid of it. Kyle follows Cartman to argue for free speech, for the right of a television show to air whatever content it chooses without bowing to the threat of violence. Parker and Stone built the episode as an explicit argument. The South Park episode and the Family Guy episode within it were making the same point from 2 different directions, that a situation in which the threat threat of violence determines what can and cannot appear on television is a situation in which violence has already won, regardless of whether a single act of violence ever actually occurs. The moment a media organization changes what it publishes because of what might happen to it if it does not, the people making that threat have achieved their goal. They have not needed to act. The threat itself was enough. Parker and Stone wanted Muhammad to appear on screen at the end of Cartoon Wars Part 2. Within the show's story, the Family Guy episode airs. The scene that was always going to be controversial plays. Muhammad appears. He is depicted doing something entirely ordinary, standing, handing a football helmet to someone, committing no act that any reasonable person could read as mocking or degrading. The scene was specifically constructed to be as neutral as possible. If the image itself was the problem, Parker and Stone were going to demonstrate exactly that the image itself, divorced from any insulting context, was what the network was afraid of. Comedy Central replaced the scene with a black screen. Text appeared on that screen informing the viewer that Comedy Central had made the decision not to broadcast an image of Muhammad on their network. The information was presented plainly. No alternative footage was shown. No explanation beyond the statement itself was offered. The episode continued after the black screen, but the scene Parker and Stone had written and produced was gone, replaced with a direct notification to the audience that the network had removed it. Parker and Stone spoke publicly about this afterward. Parker said that Comedy Central had, to their credit, told the truth about why they were doing it. The network was not claiming to act out of respect for Muslim audiences or out of sensitivity to religious concerns. The network said it was afraid. Parker quoted a network representative as saying they did not want to get blown up. He said he respected that answer more than he would have respected a false one. Comedy Central had weighed the options and made a calculation about what its employees and its facilities were worth compared to what would be gained by airing the scene, and the calculation had come out against the scene. Parker said he and Stone had no lasting hard feelings about it because at least the network had been honest. What Parker and Stone did find genuinely difficult was the double standard the decision revealed and locked in. South Park had, across many episodes, depicted Jesus in situations that practicing Christians found deeply offensive. Jesus appears throughout the show's run in positions of weakness, in comic situations, in scenes that treat his divine significance as a setup for a joke. Comedy Central had never intervened. The show had also broadcast content mocking Jewish figures and traditions, Mormon doctrine, Buddhist practice, and every other form of religious belief it had addressed. None of that had produced network intervention. Muhammad standing on screen doing nothing, handing over an ordinary object, triggered a complete editorial override. Parker and Stone pointed to this specifically. The same network that allowed Jesus to be depicted in degrading ways, that allowed every other religious figure to appear in whatever context the show constructed, had drawn a single line at Muhammad. That line existed not because of a consistent principle about respecting religious feeling, but because a specific group had made it clear that crossing the line in their case might produce consequences that no other group had demonstrated it was willing or able to produce. The censorship was not consistent. It was a response to demonstrated threat. By censoring Muhammad, Comedy Central had confirmed that the way to determine what South Park was allowed to say about your community was to make the cost of saying it high enough. Parker and Stone made this argument inside the episode itself. Kyle delivers a speech at the end of Cartoon Wars Part 2 about exactly this dynamic. The speech is about what happens to free expression when the fear of one particular kind of consequence starts to quietly reshape what people are willing to say. The argument is clear and the episode makes it without pulling away from it. But Kyle's speech was about the situation. The black screen that replaced Muhammad's image was the situation. They existed in the same broadcast simultaneously, an episode arguing against censorship of a specific image, with that specific image censored in the broadcast of that episode. The episode was nominated for an Emmy Award after it aired. Trey Parker noted afterward that the thing people talked about most in the press coverage of Cartoon Wars was not the point the episode was making about censorship and free expression. What most coverage focused on was the show's extended mockery of Family Guy, which Parker and Stone had used as a vehicle for the episode, but which dominated the public conversation. The serious argument the episode was making got less attention than the joke about another cartoon. Parker found this more frustrating than the censorship itself. Super Best Friends remained off broadcast and off every streaming platform going forward. Cartoon Wars Part 1 and Cartoon Wars Part 2 joined it in that status, remaining banned from the show's digital library. As of the show's move to Paramount Plus in 2025, all 3 episodes were absent from the platform alongside the 2 episodes from season 2014 that would eventually follow the same path for the same reason. The Danish cartoon controversy had reshaped what South Park was allowed to show. Comedy Central had made a decision under pressure and had acknowledged it honestly. Parker and Stone had made an episode about that decision and watched it get censored while it was making its argument. Everything was out in the open. The position of every party involved was visible. Before we move on, if you're enjoying this analysis, please consider subscribing. It helps the channel tremendously. 4 years later, the same argument came back around. This time, Parker and Stone tried again. A bigger episode, a more elaborate construction, an attempt to push through the line that had been drawn in 2006 and see whether the network would hold it. This time, the response came not just from the network. This time, it came from a man in Virginia with a laptop, a jihadist website, and a specific plan for what he thought should happen to the people who made the show. Section 7. The Threat, the Black Screen, and 25 years. Zachary Adam Chesser was 20 years old and living in Fairfax County, Virginia, when South Park aired its 200th episode. He had converted to Islam in 2008 at 18 years old. In the roughly 2 years between his conversion and April 2010, he had moved steadily toward an extreme interpretation of the faith, one that held that certain acts against Islam and its prophet were not merely offensive, but required a physical response from believers. He maintained online profiles dedicated to extremist content. He had exchanged emails with Anwar al-Awlaki, a Yemeni-American cleric who had been formally designated by the United States government as a global terrorist. Chesser had, on at least 2 occasions before April 2010, attempted to leave the United States and travel to Somalia to join al-Shabaab, a militant group the US government had designated as a foreign terrorist organization. Both attempts had failed. He was still in Virginia, still online, when the 200th episode of South Park aired on April 14th, 2010. The 200th episode was called 200. Parker and Stone chose the most direct possible title for a milestone episode. The story they built around that milestone was one of the most elaborate constructions the show had ever attempted. A meta episode. An episode that was partly about South Park itself, about every enemy the show had made over its first 13 years, and about every controversy it had survived. The premise was that all of the celebrities South Park had ever mocked were filing a class action lawsuit against the town. Tom Cruise organized them. The celebrities agreed they would settle the lawsuit and drop all legal claims against South Park on one condition. The town would produce Muhammad, the Islamic prophet, and deliver him to the celebrities. Their interest in Muhammad was specific. Muhammad alone, among all the world's religious figures, had a quality that protected him from ridicule. No comedian could mock him without consequence. No show could depict him without facing the kind of response that had followed the Danish cartoons. The celebrities wanted that quality for themselves. If they could acquire whatever it was that made Muhammad untouchable, they would be untouchable too. Throughout 200 and into the following episode, 201, which aired on April 21st, 2010, Muhammad was present in the story, but hidden from view at every moment. He traveled inside a rental moving truck. He moved through scenes inside a bear costume. The show was working through the tension between what it wanted to say, that the protection from mockery extended to Muhammad was the result of credible fear rather than genuine respect, and what it was permitted to show. The bear suit containing Muhammad was eventually revealed to contain not Muhammad at all, but Santa Claus. Muhammad had been kept out of view throughout both episodes, even within the story Parker and Stone were telling. The episodes were about the impossibility of showing Muhammad. Muhammad was not shown in them. After 200 aired, Chesser went online. He posted on the website of Revolution Muslim, a radical group operating out of New York City that its own co-founder, Jesse Curtis Morton, had built into what federal investigators would later describe as the top catalyst for violent radicalization in the United States during those years. Under the username Abu Talha al-Amariki, Chesser published a message about Parker and Stone. He wrote that what they were doing was stupid and that they would probably wind up like Theo van Gogh. Theo van Gogh was a Dutch filmmaker. In 2004, Van Gogh made a short film called Submission that examined the treatment of women inside certain Muslim communities. On November 2nd, 2004, a 26-year-old Dutch-Moroccan man named Mohamed Bouyeri shot Van Gogh multiple times on a street in Amsterdam while Van Gogh was cycling to work. When Van Gogh fell, Bouyeri stabbed him repeatedly. He used a second knife to pin a letter to Van Gogh's body, threatening others he considered enemies of Islam. Van Gogh died on the street that morning. Bouyeri was arrested, convicted of murder, and sentenced to life in prison. He has said in court that he would do the same thing again if released. Chesser included a photograph of Van Gogh's body in his post. Beneath the image, he wrote that what happened to Van Gogh was not a threat threat to Parker and Stone, but a warning of the reality of what would likely happen to them. He also posted, on the Revolution Muslim website and on multiple other online locations, the address of the production office where South Park was made. He described this as providing a place to start for anyone who wanted to act on the warning he had issued. He posted on Twitter urging Muslims to pray for Allah to kill Parker and Stone and consign them to hell permanently. He published articles on various extremist websites calling for violent action in response to the episode. Federal investigators from the FBI's Washington field office, who had already been monitoring Chesser's online activity for some time, documented all of it. Comedy Central made its decision about the second episode before it aired. 201 was delivered to the network by Parker and Stone in its finished form, as all South Park episodes were delivered. Complete, ready to broadcast, requiring no further production work. Before 201 went on air, Comedy Central's team censored it. Every image of Muhammad in the episode was replaced with a solid black box. Every time a character spoke Muhammad's name, the audio was replaced with a bleep. This covered every line of dialogue that mentioned him, every scene in which his presence was referenced, every moment in the two episodes connected story where the character at the center of the plot was named or shown. Then the censorship went further. Kyle Broflovsky delivers a speech at the end of 201. Kyle's speeches at the ends of episodes, his statements about what the episode's events have revealed, are a recurring feature of the show going back to its earliest seasons. In 201, Kyle's closing speech was about intimidation. It was about what happens to the ability to say things freely when the consequences of saying certain things become severe enough to change behavior. The speech did not mention Muhammad. It did not name any religion. It did not reference the plot's central controversy directly. It was a speech about fear and self-censorship, delivered in Kyle's voice at the close of an episode about exactly those subjects. Comedy Central bleeped Kyle's speech. The entire speech was replaced with an audio bleep from start to finish. Not because of anything Kyle said, but because the speech existed at the end of an episode where everything else had already been bleeped, and the network made the decision to bleep it along with everything else. Parker and Stone did not know this until they watched the episode air. They had not been told what the network was going to do to their finished product. They watched 201 on television, the way any viewer in America watched it, and heard the bleep running through Kyle's voice where their words had been. Parker and Stone issued a statement after the episode aired. They confirmed that Comedy Central had censored the episode after it was delivered. They confirmed that they had been given no advance notice. They stated that the final speech had nothing to do with Muhammad and had been bleeped for no reason that related to the actual content of the words. They expressed deep frustration. They also noted, as they had noted after Cartoon Wars 4 years earlier, that the same network had broadcast every other piece of content the show had ever produced. Content targeting Jesus, Moses, Buddha, Joseph Smith, every religious tradition the show had ever addressed, without a single similar intervention. Muhammad standing inside a bear suit while everyone talked about him brought the network to a complete editorial override of a finished and delivered piece of work, without informing the people who made it. After the episodes aired, Comedy Central confirmed to the public and to the press that the censorship had been applied by the network. The South Park Studios website, where episodes were available to stream freely, posted a message regarding 201. The message stated that South Park Studios was not able to stream the episode. The website listed the episode's number in the archive, but the episode did not play. Visitors were told only that it could not be streamed there. Super Best Friends, which had already been pulled from the site in the weeks following the Danish cartoon controversy 4 years earlier, remained absent. Cartoon Wars Part 1 and Part 2 remained absent. 200 joined them shortly after its own air date. 201 was added to the same group. In July 2010, Chesser attempted for a third time to leave the United States. He purchased a flight from New York to Uganda with the intention of continuing from Uganda to Somalia to join Al-Shabaab. He brought his infant son with him on the journey. He told his wife the child was part of his cover, that traveling with a baby would make federal agents less likely to flag him as a man trying to reach a terrorist organization in East Africa. On July 10, 2010, Chesser arrived at the gate for his departure flight. He was informed by the airline that he was on the no-fly list. He was stopped from boarding. Federal agents from the FBI questioned him that day. He was formally arrested 11 days later on July 21, 2010. Chesser was charged with 3 federal offenses. The first was communicating threats against the creators of South Park. The second was soliciting crimes of violence, specifically using the internet to call on other people to commit violent acts against Parker, Stone, and cartoonists who had participated in an online event called Everybody Draw Muhammad Day, which had been organized as an act of public support for free expression. Chesser had published the home addresses and contact information of people who joined that event, alongside language calling for action against them. The third charge was attempting to provide material support to al-Shabaab. On October 20th, 2010, Chesser appeared in federal court in Alexandria, Virginia, before U.S. District Judge Liam O'Grady and pleaded guilty to all three charges. On February 25th, 2011, Judge O'Grady sentenced Chesser to 25 years in federal prison. U.S. Attorney Neil McBride delivered a statement at sentencing. He said that Zachary Chesser would spend 25 years in prison for advocating the murder of U.S. citizens for engaging in free speech about his religion. A second statement from the government described the ongoing harm Chesser had caused, that the people he had targeted remained at risk for years after his arrest, that his actions had created a permanent condition of concern for individuals who had done nothing except exercise the right to speak freely. Jesse Curtis Morton, the co-founder of Revolution Muslim, who had also participated in the threats and who had fled the United States to Morocco, was arrested in Morocco and extradited. He appeared before a Virginia federal court in February 2012 and pleaded guilty to 3 charges, including using the internet to conspire to solicit murder, making threatening communications, and using the internet to place others in fear. He faced a maximum of 5 years on each charge and was sentenced in May 2012. The 5 episodes, Super Best Friends, Cartoon Wars Part 1, Cartoon Wars Part 2, 200, and 201, remained permanently removed from broadcast and from every legal streaming platform. When South Park moved from HBO Max to Paramount Plus in 2025, all 5 were absent from the new platform. The DVD release of Season 14 for Region 1 contained censored versions of both 200 and 201. The DVD releases for Region 2 and Region 4, covering the United Kingdom and Australia among others, had both episodes removed from the disc entirely, despite the packaging stating that all 14 episodes were included. The uncensored version of 201, the version Parker and Stone had actually made, the version with Kyle's speech intact, and with whatever Muhammad content had been produced, eventually appeared online through unofficial means and has circulated there since. It is not difficult to find. The censored version remains the only one that has ever existed on any official platform. The Malaysia Islamic Political Party, PAS, one of the largest opposition parties in that country, issued a public statement following the airing of 200, demanding that the makers of South Park and its broadcaster formally apologize to Muslims worldwide for the depiction of Muhammad in a bear suit. PAS Vice President Mahfouz Omar stated publicly that despite whatever audio censorship had been applied, the show's producer and broadcaster should apologize because the matter was sensitive and the depiction provocative. No apology was issued by Parker, Stone, or Comedy Central. South Park's 5 banned episodes remained the permanent record of everything that years of pressure, legal maneuvering, religious lobbying, institutional censorship, and genuine terrorism threats had achieved in their attempts to contain what the show was allowed to say. The show itself kept producing new episodes on its 6-day cycle as it always had, and moved forward. Before we move on, if you're enjoying this analysis, please consider subscribing. It helps the channel tremendously. 9 years passed. Parker and Stone had avoided another domestic ban of that magnitude across all of them, staying provocative, staying fast, staying willing to go directly at targets others avoided. Then they made an episode about China, and China answered in a way that no country had answered before, removing not 1 episode or 5 episodes, but every trace of the show's existence from an entire country's internet in a matter of days. Section 8. The country that erased them. China is the most populated country on Earth. It runs one of the most controlled media environments of any country in the world. The government of the People's Republic of China manages what its citizens can access online through a system of internet controls that filters and blocks content arriving from outside the country, restricts what can be discussed on domestic platforms, and removes material that authorities consider threatening to the stability of the state or to the reputation of its leadership. Foreign television programs, films, and streaming content must receive approval from Chinese regulatory bodies before they can reach Chinese audiences through official channels. Content that criticizes the Chinese government, its leaders, or its policies is not approved. Content that appears on Chinese platforms and is later found to violate these standards is removed, often without announcement. South Park had an audience in China before October 2019. Episodes were available on Chinese streaming platforms. Fan communities discussed the show across Chinese social media. Clips circulated. The show had the kind of informal presence that many Western television programs had developed in China through the broad availability of streaming and through the appetite for English language entertainment among Chinese viewers who had grown up with internet internet access. Nothing about that presence was official. Nothing had been formally approved through Chinese regulatory channels. The show existed there the way a lot of foreign content existed in China. Noticed, watched, not yet pushed out. On October 2nd, 2019, Comedy Central broadcast the second episode of South Park's 23rd season. The episode was the 299th episode in the show's total history, one short of the 300th. Its title was Banned in China. The date of the broadcast carried a specific weight that Parker and Stone were aware of. October 2nd, 2019 was the day after October 1st, 2019, which marked exactly 70 years since the founding of the People's Republic of China. The Chinese government had organized enormous national celebrations for the anniversary across the preceding days. Whether the timing of the episode's release was a deliberate decision or an extraordinary coincidence, it landed the day after one of the most politically significant dates in the Chinese calendar. The episode follows two separate stories running alongside each other through the half hour. Stan Marsh forms a death metal band with his friends Jimmy, Kenny, and Butters. They name it Crimson Dawn. A music industry figure approaches the band and proposes making a biographical film about them, a movie based on their real lives in the style of the biographical music films that had been popular in theaters in the years immediately before the episode aired. Stan wants to leave the farm life behind and is genuinely excited by the offer. The band agrees to meet with the filmmaker. As the discussion proceeds, the conditions become clear. The film has Chinese production partners who have significant input over the final content. A representative of the Chinese government is present during filming and reviews the script. Specific aspects of the band's actual history must be removed. Characters must be cut, storylines cannot appear. Everything that might cause Chinese authorities to reject the film must be changed or eliminated entirely. Stan watches a movie about his own life being stripped of everything real until the version being produced shares almost nothing with what actually happened. He eventually refuses to continue. Randy Marsh, Stan's father, the operator of Tegrity Farms, a marijuana business that had been a central element of the show's previous season, travels to China in the episode's second storyline to expand his business into the Chinese market. Randy is arrested in China and placed in a labor camp. The camp in the episode is depicted in the style of the detention facilities that China operates in its Xinjiang region, where the Chinese government has held large numbers of people, primarily from the Muslim Uyghur community, in facilities that Chinese authorities describe as vocational training centers, and that human rights organizations, journalists, and governments of numerous other countries have described in far more serious terms. Randy is assigned manual labor. While in the camp, he encounters two other prisoners, Winnie the Pooh and Piglet. Winnie the Pooh is a fictional bear created by the English author A.A. Milne and made globally famous through decades of books, films, and television programs. Beginning around 2013, internet users in China started circulating memes that placed images of the Winnie the Pooh character alongside photographs of Chinese President Xi Jinping, suggesting a visual resemblance between the two. The meme spread widely enough that the Chinese government took notice. Images of Winnie the Pooh were restricted and blocked across Chinese internet platforms over the following years. In 2018, the Disney film Christopher Robin, a live-action production featuring Winnie the Pooh as its main character, was not approved for release in Chinese theaters. No official explanation was given, but the connection to the memes was reported across multiple international outlets. Winnie the Pooh had become, within the specific landscape of Chinese political censorship, a symbol of the government's sensitivity to anything its leadership considered personally mocking or humiliating. By placing Winnie the Pooh in a Chinese labor camp in the same episode where Hollywood was being depicted as eagerly adjusting its creative work to maintain access to the Chinese market, Parker and Stone were making a connected argument. The labor camps were real. The ban on Winnie the Pooh imagery was real. Hollywood's pattern of altering film content to meet Chinese government requirements had been publicly documented across multiple major productions in the years leading up to the episode, with studios removing characters, changing plot details, and avoiding subjects the Chinese government considered politically sensitive. Banned in China assembled all of those real elements into 30 minutes of animated television and drew the lines between them without softening any one of them. Randy kills Winnie the Pooh in the episode. He does it to secure a deal with Chinese authorities that will allow him to sell his marijuana in the country. He destroys the character who had become a symbol of quiet resistance to Xi Jinping's government in exchange for commercial access to the market that symbol's government controlled. Stan, watching his father make this choice and watching his own life story hollowed out in the service of market approval, walks away from the table and goes to write another song. Mickey Mouse appears throughout the episode as a controlling figure, managing both Randy's situation and the conditions under which the band's biographical film can proceed. The show uses Mickey Mouse to represent the Walt Disney Company, the largest entertainment company in the world at the time of the episode's broadcast, and one with a long and publicly carefully documented relationship with the Chinese market that had involved making specific accommodations to Chinese government preferences across multiple film productions. The episode shows Mickey willing to collaborate with any arrangement, regardless of what it requires, in order to preserve commercial relationships with China. Banned in China aired on October 2nd. By October 7th, 2019, 5 days after the broadcast, South Park had been removed from the Chinese internet. A search on Weibo, the Chinese social media platform with a user base comparable in scale to Twitter, returned 0 results for South Park. Not reduced results, not restricted results, 0 results across billions of historical posts. Every mention, every fan conversation, every clip share, every reference to the show that had ever appeared on Weibo was gone. The Alibaba-owned streaming platform Youku, where seasons of South Park had previously been available, carried none of them. Fan discussion forums on Chinese platforms displayed a message stating that according to relevant law and regulation, the relevant section was temporarily not open. Every official trace of South Park's existence on the Chinese internet had been removed. The Hollywood Reporter confirmed these findings on October 7th. A review of Chinese internet platforms found no remaining presence of South Park in any accessible form on any major platform. That same day, Parker and Stone published a statement on the show's official social media account. The statement read, "Like the NBA, we welcome the Chinese censors into our homes and into our hearts. We too love money more than freedom and democracy. Xi doesn't look like Winnie the Pooh at all. Tune in to our 300th episode this Wednesday at 10. Long live the great Communist Party of China. May the autumn sorghum harvest be bountiful. We good now, China?" The reference to the NBA was specific and deliberate. One day before Banned in China aired, Daryl Morey, the general manager of the Houston Rockets basketball team, had posted a message on social media expressing support for the pro-democracy protesters in Hong Kong, where sustained large-scale protests had been running for months against a proposed law that would allow people to be transferred to mainland China for prosecution. Morey's message said, "Fight for freedom. Stand with Hong Kong." The response from China was swift. Chinese state broadcasters announced they would stop airing Houston Rockets games. Chinese sponsors of the team and the league issued public statements. The NBA as an organization released a statement acknowledging that Morey's message had caused deep offense to Chinese fans. The league's response was read by many observers as an attempt to contain the damage without fully standing behind one of its own employees' right to say something. Commissioner Adam Silver subsequently defended Morey's right to express his opinion, but the initial league statement had already created a clear impression of an organization caught between protecting speech and protecting revenue. The parallel between the NBA's position and the position South Park was now in ran through the same 5-day stretch of October 2019. A major American sports organization had watched a single executive post a sentence of genuine personal belief about a political situation and had stumbled publicly in its response, pulled between its principles and its financial exposure in China. South Park had made an entire episode about exactly that dynamic, the point at which commercial interest in the Chinese market grows large enough to start determining what Western organizations say and what they refuse to say. And China had responded by removing the show from its internet completely. Parker and Stone did not soften their position. The statement they issued was itself another version of the same refusal, another deliberate act of not giving the response that would have made the problem manageable. The statement also functioned, as they made explicit at the end of it, as an advertisement for the show's 300th episode airing 4 days later. They were using the ban to promote themselves to the audience that was about to watch them. China had handed them an international news story, and they used it as a promotional moment. South Park remains banned in China. The show has not been restored to Chinese platforms. No official negotiation for any kind of return has been publicly reported. The Chinese government made no formal public statement about the ban when it happened and has made none since. The show was removed, and the removal continues. What the Chinese ban represented in the full history of South Park's relationship with censorship was genuinely different from everything before it. Romania announced itself as a regulatory decision. Kuwait operated through a ministry review process with a stated position. Comedy Central, when it censored the Muhammad episodes, acknowledged what it was doing and why. The New Zealand Religious Coalition conducted its campaign publicly and accepted the legal and regulatory outcomes when they did not go in their favor. The Revolution Muslim case moved through the American court system with charges, hearings, guilty pleas, and formal sentencing that created a public record of exactly what had happened. China produced none of that. No announcement, no complaint, no review process with a stated result, no public record of the reasoning. The show was removed from a country's internet infrastructure without comment, and the removal has been maintained remained without comment. And the country has continued operating as though the show never existed there in the first place. The scale of it, every mention, every clip, every discussion thread, every viewing record wiped from the accessible internet of a country of more than 1 billion people, accomplished within 5 days of a single episode airing, had no precedent in anything South Park had previously faced. Every other attempt to suppress the show had announced itself. China's version was silent, total, and permanent. Parker and Stone had built a show on the conviction that nothing would alter what they said or how they said it. China did not try to alter what they said. China made it so that the people most affected by what they said could not hear it. Before we move on, if you're enjoying this analysis, please consider subscribing. It helps the channel tremendously. The last case in this story arrived 6 years later, and it came from the most unexpected direction of all. Not from a foreign government, not from an extremist group, not from a religious organization, but from inside the United States, triggered by an event no one had predicted, aimed at an episode whose subject had already publicly praised the way he had been portrayed in it and called it a badge of honor. Section 9, the badge of honor. Charlie Kirk was 31 years old when South Park made an episode about him. He had founded Turning Point USA in 2012 when he was 18 years old. The organization's purpose was building conservative political presence on college campuses across the United States. It operated chapters at hundreds of universities. It trained student activists, organized speaking events, produced political content, and worked to develop what Kirk described as a movement of young people committed to free markets, limited government, and the set of values he associated with traditional American life. By the mid-2020s, Kirk had become one of the most visible figures in American conservative media. His podcast, The Charlie Kirk Show, drew large and consistent audiences. He spoke at political events regularly and had been a prominent public supporter of Donald Trump across multiple election cycles. He had a specific skill, the ability to hold a public argument with anyone who presented themselves as an opponent, without apparent anxiety, without seeming to feel the pressure of the crowd, projecting a calm certainty that his position was correct and that his willingness to defend it in front of any audience was itself the proof. That skill was the center of his public identity. It was also the thing South Park built an episode around. Season 27 of South Park began broadcasting in August 2025. The United States was in the second year of Donald Trump's second term as president, and the show had been running directly at that political landscape for some time. Trump himself had appeared in Season 27's first episode. Members of the Trump administration had appeared across earlier episodes in the same cycle. The show was operating in its most explicitly political mode in years, producing content about conservative political figures with a consistency and a directness that made clear Parker and Stone had a specific season-long focus. The second episode of Season 27 was called Got a Nut. It broadcast on Comedy Central on August 6th, 2025. The episode carries two story threads running alongside each other. In the first, South Park Elementary school counselor Mr. Mackey is fired when federal budget cuts eliminate his position. Mackey's recurring source of anxiety throughout Season 27 is his monthly expenses, a number his bank keeps making worse through fees and interest adjustments. To cover those expenses, he takes a job with Immigration and Customs Enforcement. His performance at the job is strong. He earns a bonus. Eventually, he is brought to Mar-a-Lago for a meeting with President Trump, who wants to offer him a promotion to a senior position at the Department of Homeland Security, specifically replacing Kristi Noem in the role, because Trump finds Noem's appearance disturbing. Mackey learns at this meeting that his expenses have increased again. In the second thread, a student named Clyde Donovan discovers that running a right-wing podcast generates an audience. Clyde's content offends his classmates. He expresses views that are anti-Semitic and hostile toward women. The audience keeps growing. Cartman notices this and objects, not on moral grounds, but on territorial ones. Cartman has built his entire personality around being the most aggressively provocative person in any room, and Clyde occupying that space successfully feels to Cartman like an intrusion on something that belongs to him. Cartman beats Clyde up and takes control of the podcast. On it, he engages callers in what the episode calls master debating, a word constructed from debate and a cruder term, used to describe Cartman's method of engaging in arguments he has no genuine interest in resolving, performing the structure of intellectual exchange as a spectacle, rather than as a real attempt to get anywhere. Clyde eventually wins the Charlie Kirk Award for Young Master Debaters. The prize includes a free vacation to Mar-a-Lago. Cartman, who has been doing the Kirk-style performance across the podcast's run, is furious. The episode depicts Cartman adopting the surface features of Kirk's public persona, the willingness to debate anyone, the practiced calm, the campus speaking format in which opponents are invited up to attempt to change his mind, and are then engaged with the specific energy Kirk had made famous. famous. Cartman is not performing these things out of admiration. He is performing them because they work, because they generate attention, because the format is effective at producing exactly the kind of confrontation Cartman finds satisfying. The episode was not making a moral argument about whether Kirk was a good or bad person. It was taking the specific style Kirk had built into a career and filtering it through the show's most deliberately awful character, letting the two things sit next to each other and allowing viewers to make of that proximity whatever they were going to make of it. Kirk responded before the episode had finished its first full broadcast day. On August 7th, 2025, the morning after Got a Nut aired, Kirk posted on the social media platform X. His post read, "Not bad, Cartman." That day, he also spoke to Fox News and described the portrayal as a badge of honor. He said conservatives should be able to take a joke. He said the left had always been too sensitive about itself and that his side should not repeat that mistake. He framed the South Park episode as evidence of his movement's cultural relevance, the argument being that a show does not make an episode about a person unless that person has reached a level of public recognition worth addressing. He changed his YouTube profile picture to a screenshot from the episode of Cartman in his Kirk-styled presentation. The Instagram and TikTok profile pictures for The Charlie Kirk Show were also briefly updated to screen grabs from the episode. Andrew Colvett, a producer for The Charlie Kirk Show, commented publicly with similar enthusiasm. Kirk had done what very few public figures do when South Park depicts them. He did not ignore it. He did not express offense. He did not call for the episode to be removed or altered. He engaged with it directly, on his own terms, and turned it into a demonstration of the exact posture he constantly advocated for in his public work, that confident people do not need to be protected from satire about them. On September 10th, 2025, Turning Point USA was holding a campus event at Utah Valley University in Orem, Utah. The event was part of what the organization called the America Comeback Tour. The specific event at Utah Valley University was titled Prove Me Wrong, taken from the format Kirk had made famous at campus speaking appearances across years of touring. Audience members approach a microphone and attempt to challenge his stated positions, and he engages them in argument. Kirk was on stage. A single gunshot struck him in the neck. He was transported to Timpanogos Regional Hospital in Orem. He was pronounced dead there. Turning Point USA published a statement on social media confirming his death. The statement said, "It is with a heavy heart that we confirm that Charles James Kirk has been murdered by a gunshot that took place during Turning Point USA's America Comeback Tour campus event at Utah Valley University on September 10th, 2025. May he be received into the merciful arms of our loving Savior who suffered and died for Charlie." The statement asked for privacy for Kirk's family and requested prayers for them. Kirk was survived by his wife Erica Kirk and their 2 children. Donald Trump posted a tribute on Truth Social. He called Kirk great and legendary. He said no one understood or had the heart of the youth in the United States better than Kirk. He said Kirk was loved and admired by all, and especially by Trump himself. He extended his sympathy to Erica Kirk and to Kirk's family. The FBI joined the investigation from the beginning, alongside federal and local law enforcement. Authorities described the shooting as a targeted attack. 2 people were detained and questioned in the hours following. Neither was determined to have any connection to the killing. Utah Valley University closed its campus until September 15th, 2025. The investigation continued. Within hours of the news of Kirk's death spreading across social media, a segment of Kirk's supporters and a broader group of conservative commentators and political figures began pointing to Got a Nut as a contributing factor. The argument being made was that South Park's portrayal of Kirk through Cartman, the show's most familiar and most deliberately repellent character, had added to a cultural atmosphere in which Kirk was depicted as deserving contempt, and that this atmosphere had in some way fed the thinking of whoever had pulled the trigger. The argument was not accompanied by evidence connecting the episode to the shooter. No such evidence existed. The shooter's identity and motivation were still under active investigation. The connection being drawn was atmospheric rather than factual, a claim about the general climate of hostility toward Kirk, of which the South Park episode was now being listed as one element. Republican members of Congress made public statements. Representative Derek Van Orden of Wisconsin, Representative Anna Luna of Florida, and Representative Nancy Mace of South Carolina all addressed the shooting with language that attributed blame to the broader cultural and political left for creating conditions that had made this violence possible. Mace, in a confrontation with a reporter, was asked whether Republican rhetoric bore responsibility for the shootings of 2 Democratic state legislators in Minnesota earlier the same year. She declined to address the comparison. Comedy Central made a decision. A source close to South Park confirmed to the press that Comedy Central would not be airing episode 2702, Got a Nut, in its linear cable rotation. The episode would remain available on Paramount Plus. It would remain accessible on YouTube TV. A viewer viewer posted a video on X showing Comedy Central's broadcast schedule skipping directly from the first episode of season 27, titled Sermon on the Mount, to the third episode, titled Sick of Fancy, with the second episode simply absent from the sequence between them. Comedy Central's Friday overnight schedule on September 12, 2025 confirmed the same pattern. Colvett published a statement asking Comedy Central to restore the episode to its cable schedule. He said Kirk had enjoyed the portrayal. He said Kirk had described it as a badge of honor. He said Kirk would want the episode back up. A source speaking to Deadline described Comedy Central's decision as likely temporary, a holding position until the conversation around Kirk's death had settled to a point where running the episode in cable reruns would not restart the same cycle of accusations. The episode had not been altered. It had not been removed from every platform. It had been pulled from one specific distribution channel in response to one specific event, with the understanding that the pull was not meant to be permanent. What the Got a Nut situation represents in the complete record of every attempt to suppress South Park across the show's history is genuinely different from every previous case. Every prior attempt to ban or restrict the show had been deliberate and organized. Romania's regulators convened a formal process. Kuwait's ministry conducted a policy review. Scientology held internal meetings and explored specific strategies. The New Zealand Catholic Coalition organized across multiple churches and denominations, drafted legal applications, filed formal regulatory complaints, and pursued high court appeals. Revolution Muslim published explicit posts and directed action towards specific targets, with consequences that produced 2 federal guilty pleas and 1 25-year prison sentence. Comedy Central's decisions around the Muhammad episodes were institutional decisions made by people with authority over the network. China used the full regulatory capacity of a national government to erase the show from an entire country's internet infrastructure. The pressure that pulled Got a Nut from Comedy Central's cable schedule was none of those things. No organization planned it, no institution authorized it, no regulatory body reviewed the episode and issued a ruling. No religious leader drafted a letter, no government body convened a meeting. The pressure was the raw temperature of a country absorbing a public assassination in real time, expressing itself through social media fast enough that Comedy Central read it and responded within hours. The removal was quiet. No announcement was made. The schedule simply skipped the episode. The decision was not presented as a policy position or a value statement. It was a quiet operational choice made under circumstances nobody had anticipated when the episode was written, produced, and aired. Kirk had done everything correctly by any reasonable standard of how a public figure responds to satire. He had watched the episode, found it funny, said so without reservation, used it as a demonstration of his own stated principles, and given the show a public endorsement that most satirists would have been glad to receive. None of that changed what happened after September 10th. The episode had his name in it. He was dead. Those two facts together created a situation that Comedy Central chose to manage by removing the episode from one channel while leaving it everywhere else, regardless of what Kirk himself had believed about the portrayal. The show kept going. Season 27's third episode broadcast on September 23rd, 2025 on Comedy Central and on Paramount Plus the following day. The 6-day production cycle continued. New episodes kept arriving. Across the full span of the show's history, 9 separate attempts to stop it from saying something or being seen by an audience, a European Regulatory Council, a Gulf government ministry, a religious institution with celebrity connections and legal history, a multi-country coalition of bishops, prime ministers, and faith organizations, a radical organization with terrorist connections whose leaders ended up in federal prison, the government of China, the ambient political grief of a country after an assassination. And in between all of those, the quiet, permanent removal of 5 episodes from every legal streaming platform, maintained without announcement across every year since 2010, and through every change of streaming home the show has made. Before we move on, if you're enjoying this analysis, please consider subscribing. It helps the channel tremendously. What the pattern across all of it actually reveals about satire, about power, about what suppression accomplishes and what it fails to accomplish, settles into focus when all 9 cases are held together in the same view at once. Section 10. What the bans actually accomplished. 9 attempts across 28 years. 9 separate cases where a government, a religious organization, a corporation, an extremist group, or the unorganized pressure of public grief reached towards South Park and tried to make it stop. The attempts came from countries on 4 different continents. They used legal systems, regulatory councils, death threats, court injunctions, federal charges, national internet infrastructure, celebrity leverage, advertiser boycotts, pastoral letters read from church pulpit, and the quiet adjustment of a cable television broadcast schedule. Every single one of them was real. Every single one of them produced some kind of result. None of them stopped the show. South Park continued through every case in this record. It continued through the Romanian ban, producing new seasons while an entire European country's television audience had no official access to it. It continued through Kuwait's complete prohibition, making hundreds of new episodes for the rest of the world while Kuwait watched something else entirely. It continued through the Scientology pressure, writing Isaac Hayes' character out of the program with deliberate bluntness and moving forward without pausing to mourn the loss. It continued through the New Zealand Catholic Coalition, through the bishop's pastoral letter and the Prime Minister's statement and the court injunction and the Broadcasting Standards Authority complaints and the High Court appeal. It continued through Comedy Central's censorship of the Muhammad episodes, through the Revolution Muslim death threats, through Zachary Chesser's 25-year federal prison sentence, through the permanent removal of 5 episodes from every legal platform on Earth. It continued through the Chinese government erasing every trace of its existence from the internet of the most populated country on the planet. It continued after Charlie Kirk's assassination pulled one episode from a cable schedule, producing the very next episode within its standard 6-day cycle and broadcasting it on schedule. The show kept going. That fact is the most important fact in the entire record. But the second most important fact is that the bans did produce results. Saying that the show survived is not the same as saying the attempts to stop it were completely without effect. They were not without effect. The effects were real, measurable, and in some cases permanent. Understanding what the bans actually accomplished requires holding both of those things at once. The show survived and the bans left marks. The most permanent marks were left by the Muhammad cases. 5 episodes of South Park, Super Best Friends, Cartoon Wars Part 1, Cartoon Wars Part 2, 200, and 201 have been absent from every legal streaming platform since 2010. That is 15 years as of the time of writing. The show has moved streaming homes twice during those 15 years, from Comedy Central's own platform to HBO Max and then to Paramount Plus. All 5 episodes were absent from each platform. They were absent when South Park's library moved to Paramount Plus in mid-2025, carrying across 26 seasons and more than 300 episodes. All 26 seasons were present, all 5 Muhammad episodes were absent. Viewers who want to watch those 5 episodes legally cannot do so. Physical DVD copies of the seasons that contain them represent the only official option, and even those copies are censored in specific ways. The Region 1 DVD release of Season 14 contains censored versions of 200 and 201. The blacked out images and the bleeped audio are present even on the physical disc. The Region 2 and Region 4 DVD releases of Season 14 had both episodes removed entirely from the disc, despite the packaging stating all episodes were included. Super Best Friends is present on its Season 5 physical release in its original uncensored form. Cartoon Wars Part 1 and Cartoon Wars Part 2 are present on the Season 10 physical release. The uncensored version of 201, the version Parker and Stone actually made, with Kyle's closing speech intact, with whatever visual content Comedy Central replaced with black screens, has circulated online through unofficial channels since shortly after the episode first aired. It is findable. It has been findable for 15 years. The people who wanted to watch it have been able to watch it. The censorship did not make the content disappear. What it did was remove the show's own access to those episodes. Comedy Central, Parker and Stone, Paramount, none of them can officially offer those 5 episodes to an audience. The episodes exist in a space where the people who made them cannot present them, and the people who want to watch them can find them without permission. That is the specific and permanent accomplishment of Revolution Muslim's threats, measured against all the other outcomes. Chesser went to federal prison for 25 years. Morton received his sentence. Both men's organizations were dismantled. The people who made the threats paid serious consequences for making them, and the 5 episodes have remained off every legal platform regardless, because the institutional decision made under the pressure those threats created in 2010 has simply never been reversed. No one at Comedy Central or at Paramount has made a public decision to restore those episodes to streaming. The question of whether the threats are still an active consideration or whether the institutional habit of not touching those 5 episodes has simply calcified into permanent policy is not publicly answered. The result is the same either way. Romania's ban lasted 8 years. That is a long time. A child who was 10 years old when South Park was removed from Romanian television in 2000 would have been 18, legally an adult, when it returned in 2008. An entire phase of growing up passed during which Romanian audiences had no official access to the show. The ban ended, the show returned, no episode was permanently altered by it, but 8 years of absence from an entire country's television landscape is not nothing. It is a real consequence that affected a real audience for a real span of time. Kuwait's ban never ended and shows no sign of ending. South Park has never officially broadcast in Kuwait. The 3 seasons of Block 13 that were produced as a replacement have come and gone. Nothing has changed in the decades since the original decision was made. Every episode produced across 28 seasons has been produced for an audience that does not include Kuwaiti viewers in any official sense. The ban is permanent in practice, if not stated as permanent in policy. Kuwait's audience for South Park consists of whoever has found unofficial access, and the official record remains clear. The Scientology case produced the most personal and lasting consequence of any attempt in the show's history. Isaac Hayes never returned to South Park. He died in August 2008 without the situation having been resolved. The character of Chef, one of the show's most genuinely warm and well-loved supporting figures across 10 years and the show's entire first 9 seasons, was written out of the program in a manner that reflected the anger Parker and Stone felt about the circumstances. Chef has not returned in any meaningful way since. The voice, the character, the specific warmth that Hayes brought to the role across a decade of episodes is gone from the show. Not because Parker and Stone chose to move on from the character for creative reasons, but because a religious organization made a decision on behalf of a man who was medically unable to make it himself, and that decision was never undone before Hayes passed away. Hayes III has spoken publicly and consistently about wanting the record corrected. The record has been corrected in the sense that the truth of what happened is now clearly documented and widely available. The practical outcome, Chef's absence from the show, Hayes' departure from a role his son says he loved and would never have voluntarily left, is not correctable. That is permanent. The New Zealand Bloody Mary case produced one lasting outcome that its organizers did not intend and would not have wanted. The episode drew 210,000 viewers on the night of its New Zealand broadcast. South Park's normal C4 audience was 32,500. Every organized effort to prevent people from watching the episode, the pastoral letters, the advertiser campaign, the court injunction attempt, the Prime Minister's statement, the Cross-Faith Coalition, collectively delivered a viewing audience 6 times larger than the show attracted in an ordinary week. The Broadcasting Standards Authority rejected every complaint. The High Court appeal by the Catholic bishops produced no change to that ruling. The episode returned to Comedy Central's American schedule in August 2006. C4 chose not to rebroadcast it in New Zealand, which is the one concrete concession the campaign achieved on its own territory. The Chinese ban removed South Park from the most populated country on Earth, and has maintained that removal without comment or reversal for 6 years. The show had no official presence in China before the ban, so the commercial loss was not a loss of existing revenue. The cultural loss was different. A large informal audience that had developed its own relationship with the show across Chinese platforms lost that access through official channels. Parker and Stone made no attempt to address the situation in a way that might have resulted in restoration of the show to Chinese platforms. They issued their sarcastic non-apology, promoted their 300th episode, and moved forward. The ban remains. Their response to it has never changed in character. The Gotta Nut situation produced the most temporary restriction of any case in the record. The episode was pulled from Comedy Central's cable schedule following Kirk's assassination. It remained available on Paramount Plus, on YouTube TV, and on demand through Comedy Central's own on-demand system. The restriction was confined to a single distribution channel. Sources described it as temporary. The episode was not altered. No content was removed from it. No statement was issued about its content being problematic. The pull was a response to timing and to the heat of the public conversation in the days immediately following a public assassination, not a judgment about the episode itself. Across all 9 cases, the pattern of what suppression actually accomplishes resolves into something specific and consistent. Complete erasure is essentially impossible. South Park survived every attempt to erase it from public life, and in the cases where the attempt was most organized and most sustained, the New Zealand campaign being the clearest example, the act of organized suppression dramatically amplified the show's audience. The 5 banned Muhammad episodes circulate online and have circulated continuously for 15 years. Every banned episode in every country that has officially prohibited the show has been accessible to viewers willing to look for it through other means. What suppression does accomplish, consistently, is institutional removal. The 5 Muhammad episodes are not on Paramount Plus. That is real. Viewers who rely on official platforms cannot find them there. Romania's audience was without the show for 8 years through official channels. Kuwait's audience remains without it permanently through official channels. The gap between what is officially accessible and and what is actually accessible has narrowed dramatically in the era of internet distribution. But the official absence is still meaningful. It shapes what casual viewers encounter, what algorithmic recommendations surface, what platforms present to subscribers. Suppression also accomplishes the creation of a record. Every ban, every censorship decision, every legal case, every regulatory ruling adds a document to a public archive of what someone tried to stop and why. That archive is itself a form of argument. Romania's ban documents what a post-communist nation with a specific and painful relationship to anti-Semitism was willing to do with a piece of American satire it could not process as satire. Kuwait's ban documents the formal position of an Islamic government toward a program that treated religious figures as material for comedy. Comedy Central's censorship of the Muhammad episodes documents an institutional decision to respond to a credible threat of violence by removing content from a program its own creative team had already delivered in finished form, without informing that team of the change. The Chinese erasure documents what a national government with full control of its internet infrastructure can do within 5 days of a single episode airing on a foreign network. The "got a nut" situation documents what ambient public grief and unorganized social media pressure, moving fast enough through a particular political moment, can produce without any deliberate organizational effort at all. All of it taken together is a map of every point where South Park's operating principle, that nothing and no one is exempt from being addressed, ran into a wall. The wall took different forms in different places. It was built from different materials. Some parts of it have since come down. Some are still standing. Some were never walls exactly, more like pressure that bent something without breaking it. The show pressed against every one of them and kept going on the other side. Parker and Stone made their 300th episode 4 days after China erased them. They made the episode that followed "Got a Nut" within their standard 6-day cycle after Kirk's assassination. They are still making South Park. Season 27 ran its course. Season 28 followed. The 6-day production cycle has not been interrupted by any of the 9 cases in this record. Not for a single episode. Not for a single week. What that sustained forward motion means, what it says about the relationship between a piece of creative work and all the forces that try to stop it from existing, is what this entire record has been building toward from the beginning. If you enjoyed this video essay, make sure to subscribe. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.